The night of June 15th, 2019, was thick with heat in Haven Ridge, Georgia. Cicadas screamed in the trees. Lights from the summer fair still flickered across the empty streets. Caleb and Rosie Dalton, 12 and 10, left the festival just after 9:30. They never made it home. By morning, their bikes still leaned against the fence. Their mother's porch light still burned. The town that never locked its doors suddenly didn't sleep at all. 5 years later, something buried near the old railway viaduct forced the case open again. And the man arrested wasn't a stranger. He was one of their own. Subscribe for more true stories like this, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? It was Saturday, June 15th, 2019, and the air in Haven Ridge, Georgia, felt like it was made of steam. The summer fair was winding down, music fading, lights buzzing, people drifting toward their cars with paper cups of lemonade and tired smiles. Caleb and Rosie Dalton had stayed until the very end. Caleb carried a small stuffed bear he had won for his sister, its ear half torn from the ring toss booth. Rosie held a plastic cup of melted ice, still talking about the fireworks that never came. Their mother, Rebecca, had called once around 9, telling them not to be late, and Caleb, always the responsible one, promised they were on their way. They cut through the back of the fairground, past the Ferris wheel skeleton still turning slow against the sky, and onto Maple Street, the shortcut home. A neighbor's security camera caught them at 9:37, two small figures under the amber glow of a streetlight. Rosie skipping, Caleb walking behind her, head turned towards something off-screen. Then the frame froze, flickered, and they were gone. At 10, Rebecca stepped out onto the porch. The porch light hummed, the cicadas screamed, and the air pressed down like a weight. She waited. She called again. No answer. At 10:30, she walked the short road to the fairground, her heart already thudding against her ribs. Volunteers were packing up tents, folding metal chairs, stacking trash bins. No one had seen the children leave. One man remembered hearing a girl laughing near the lot behind the old train depot, but he wasn't sure when. Another said he'd seen a pickup parked by the tracks, engine running, headlights off. By midnight, Rebecca was standing in front of the Haven Ridge police station, still wearing her apron from the diner, still smelling like coffee and grease. The officer behind the desk looked half asleep when she said, "My children didn't come home." He wrote it down slow, asked if they'd ever run away before. She shook her head. "They're 10 and 12, she whispered. "They still sleep with the light on." The first patrol car rolled through Maple Street after 1. Flashlights swept over the Daltons' yard, the bikes still leaning against the fence, the small shoes by the back door. The officer made notes, said they'd keep an eye out. By 2, Rebecca's sister had arrived, barefoot, crying, clutching a blanket. They searched the park, the church steps, the creek behind the school. Every shadow looked like hope until the sun came up. At dawn, Haven Ridge woke to sirens. Word spread faster than truth. 2 children missing. Last seen near the fair. Flyers were printed at the gas station before breakfast. Neighbors knocked on doors, called names into the woods, combed through tall grass along the riverbank. By noon, news vans had arrived from Savannah, their cables snaking through the dirt. The local pastor said prayers over the empty swings in the playground. When police finally brought in the dogs, they picked up a faint trail from Maple Street that led toward the old railway viaduct. It stopped 50 yards from the tracks where the gravel turned to mud. There they found a single footprint, too small to be Caleb's. Rosie's shoe had a star carved in the sole. The print matched perfectly. By nightfall, the fairground was empty, silent except for the echo of generators shutting down. Rebecca sat on the porch, still waiting, the phone in her lap, the light still burning. The air smelled like rain, but the storm never came. In the distance, someone revved a truck and drove away slow, tires crunching over gravel. No one knew it yet, but that sound would be remembered later. In the following days, police would tell her they'd done everything they could, that children run away, that sometimes they just wander off. But Haven Ridge would never forget the night Caleb and Rosie Dalton vanished, because it was the night the whole town stopped believing it was safe. By sunrise the next morning, Haven Ridge was already awake. Word had spread before the coffee even started brewing. 2 children missing, brother and sister, last seen near the fairground. Rebecca Dalton stood on her porch in the same clothes she had worn the night before, hair tied back, face pale, eyes hollow. The sheriff arrived just after 6, his cruiser rolling slow up Maple Street. He promised her they were doing everything they could, that most missing children come home within 24 hours, but his voice carried the same tired weight of someone who had said it too many times before. Volunteers began gathering by 7. Teachers, neighbors, teenagers, still in their pajamas, everyone holding cups of gas station coffee and paper maps that were already smudged from the humidity. The pastor from St. Mary's Church brought a box of flashlights. The fire chief handed out radios. By 8, the search line stretched across the meadow behind the fairground, dozens of people moving shoulder to shoulder through the tall grass, calling the children's names over and over. The sound echoed through the trees, bounced off the creek, came back smaller each time. News vans parked along Main Street. Reporters with bright makeup and serious voices asked for statements. Rebecca didn't speak. Her sister did, her hands shaking as she held up a photo of Caleb and Rosie smiling on their front steps. Caleb in his red Braves cap, Rosie with a gap in her front teeth. The headline that ran on the evening news said, "Small town in shock after Dalton, children disappear." By noon, the sheriff called in state police. Dogs were brought from Macon. Helicopters circled over the river. Volunteers searched the rail line near the old viaduct. One of the deputies found a piece of fabric caught on a branch. It looked like the hem of a dress, light pink, smeared with mud. Rebecca recognized it immediately. It was Rosie's. She had worn that dress to the fair. The air changed after that. The laughter stopped. No one spoke above a whisper. Detectives marked the spot with orange tape and started sweeping the area. They found small footprints leading down toward the river. Then nothing. The tracks just ended. The dogs lost the scent at the edge of the water. One of the handlers said the current was strong that week, that the river might have taken anything that fell in. Rebecca collapsed when she heard it. By evening, the mayor announced a curfew. Parents pulled their children indoors, locked their doors, shut their blinds. The carnival rides stood motionless in the dark field, half taken apart, their shadows stretching long across the grass. A week before, this had been laughter and lights. Now it felt like a graveyard. Each night the search expanded. Crews swept the woods with thermal cameras, divers scoured the river, but every lead went nowhere. The sheriff held daily press briefings on the courthouse steps, repeating the same words. No suspects at this time. Investigation ongoing. Reporters kept asking about a white pickup spotted near the fairground that night. He said it was being looked into. It never was. By the 4th day, posters covered every window in Haven Ridge. Missing Caleb and Rosie Dalton. Their faces smiled from gas pumps, church doors, grocery carts. Rebecca refused to leave home. She kept the porch light on, sitting by the window until dawn, whispering their names as if the air itself could carry them back. On the 7th day, volunteers searching near the railway bridge found something glinting in the dirt. A silver bracelet, small enough to fit a child's wrist, engraved with the word, Rosie. It was broken. The clasp snapped clean. When the deputy handed it to Rebecca, she didn't scream. She just stared, her fingers trembling as if afraid the metal would vanish if she blinked. That night, the town held a vigil on the courthouse lawn. Hundreds of candles burned against the darkness. The pastor spoke, his voice breaking when he said their names. Rebecca stood alone in the front row, her hands clasped around the bracelet, the wax light flickering across her face. And somewhere beyond the trees, down by the water, a single porch light still burned, waiting for 2 children who would never walk through that door again. In every search there is always someone who shows up first and leaves last. The one who knows where the flashlights are kept, who brings coffee at dawn, who remembers the names of the dogs and the streets and the gullies that flood after a storm. In Haven Ridge, that person was Elliot Ward, 34, county roads crew, part-time volunteer with the fire station. A face people trusted without thinking, a man whose white pickup with the ladder rack had hauled folding tables for church suppers and sandbags during spring floods. He stood at the fairground command post on the 2nd morning with a clipboard and a calm voice, arranging search grids like he had done it all his life. He said he had been at the fair that night to fix a generator behind the food stalls. He said he left before 10. He said he went home to his mother's house on Willow Creek Road because her porch light had gone out again and she hated the dark. The sheriff nodded as if the details fit a pattern he already believed. The deputies wrote it all down and moved on. There were too many people to interview and not enough time. The white pickup rumor would not die. A boy from the high school said he had seen a truck idling near the old train depot with its lights off. An older woman swore she had heard a tailgate slam by the tracks just after the fair closed. A food vendor remembered a man with work boots and a county badge cutting behind the Ferris wheel with a coil of cable. When reporters pressed the sheriff about maintenance crews working that late, he said schedules were being reviewed. He said not to speculate. He said this was a mall town and people talk. On the third night of the search, a deputy followed tire impressions from Maple Street toward the viaduct. Wide treads, worn on the outer edge. The pattern matched a brand the county garage used for its trucks. The mud was a mess. The prints were partial. They cast them in plaster anyway. The result looked like a smudged thumbprint left in clay. Suggestive but useless. Rebecca stared at the mold as if it could speak. The deputy apologized without meeting her eyes. Elliot kept showing up. He walked the creek. He nailed missing posters to telephone poles. He told Rebecca to drink water and sit down for a minute, and then he kept walking. People called him a blessing. A steady hand. The kind of man you pray for in a storm. He told the pastor he could organize the Southern Grid. He told the news he just wanted to help. He told the sheriff he would keep his eyes open on county routes outside town. And he did. Because his pickup was seen everywhere that week. Everywhere except on any official log. When detectives canvassed the fairground, a teenager handed over a shaky phone video taken at 9:30 that night. It showed the Ferris wheel lights reflected in puddles. It caught a man in a ball cap, moving through the shadows with a coil of cable on his shoulder. It caught the shape of a white truck behind the food stalls by the generator. The clip blurred when the camera swung. The face never resolved. The timestamp was correct. The image was not. The lead stalled. The video joined a folder of almost answers. Elliot's alibi sounded ordinary. He had stopped at the depot to check on a light. He had walked the back lot to reach his truck. He had waved at the night watchman. Except the depot did not employ a night watchman in summer. The position had been cut in April. When a deputy called the rail company, they said the last staffer left at 9. After that, the lot was dark. When this detail surfaced, the sheriff said the statement must have been misunderstood. He said the witness was under stress. He said the focus should remain on finding the children. No one argued, because hope needs direction, and the search still needed someone to carry boxes and keep the radios charged. On the 5th day, a mechanic at the county garage mentioned that Elliot's pickup had a dented rear fender from a backing mishap in the yard, left side, just above the wheel, the same place the boy had described when he talked about the truck by the depot. The deputy wrote it down and asked when the damage occurred. The mechanic shrugged. Sometime last spring, maybe early summer. Who could remember? The note went into the file with the cast impressions and the phone clip, and a growing list of facts that did not connect. Rebecca began to notice small things that felt like warnings. Elliot always arrived before the sheriff. Elliot knew which streets to sweep before the map was printed. Elliot knew that Rosie liked pink dresses because he said he saw her spinning by the lemonade stand. There was no video of that. There were only his words, and in a town that believed what familiar voices said, words were often enough. When the week ended without answers, the sheriff stood on the courthouse steps and promised that no stone would be left unturned. Elliot stood in the crowd, with his arms folded and his eyes on the ground. Afterward, he loaded water cases into the bed of his truck. Then he drove past Maple Street slow, past the porch with the light that never went off, past the 2 bicycles leaning against the fence like a photograph nailed to time. And he did not look up. Years later, people would replay these days in their minds and ask themselves why they did not see it. They would point to the dented fender, to the cable on his shoulder, to the tire cast, to the way he always knew where to go. They would say the truth was standing in the open, wearing a county badge and a helpful smile. But in that week, the town was drowning in fear and ritual and prayer. And Elliot Ward was exactly who he had trained them to believe he was. A neighbor with a truck and a plan, and a voice that told everyone to keep moving, keep searching, keep hoping. Even as the trail was already cold and the water by the viaduct held its silence like a secret, it had no intention of giving back. Summer turned into something colder that year, even though the calendar said July. The search teams had thinned. The reporters had left. The town posters were fading. and the Dalton porch light still burned every night like it was holding the sky together. Rebecca stopped working shifts at the diner. She moved like a ghost through the house, folding laundry that was already folded, watering plants that were already dead. Sometimes she heard footsteps outside and thought it was them. Times it was just the wind. Then August came, and with it a storm that ripped through Haven Ridge. The kind that knocks out power and shakes loose what the world has been trying to hide. 2 days after the storm, county maintenance crews were clearing debris along the old railway viaduct, the same stretch of road where the dogs had lost the trail. Rain had carved deep gullies in the dirt. One worker spotted something half buried near a collapsed drainage pipe, a flash of pink under the mud. He thought it was a toy. When he pulled it free, it was a small canvas shoe, soaked, the sides stitched with faded yellow stars. He called his supervisor, who called the sheriff. By noon, the area was taped off and quiet. Rebecca arrived before the coroner, before the cameras, before the whispers could reach her. She pushed past the deputy and sank to her knees in the mud. She knew the shoe, Rosie's favorite, the one she wore to the fair, the one she refused to replace because it made her feel lucky. The sheriff tried to speak, but nothing he said reached her. The world went soundless, except for the hum of insects and the drone of the news helicopter circling above. Behind the pipe they found more. A fragment of red fabric caught in a branch, a zipper, a page torn from a notebook, water-stained but still legible, a list written in Caleb's careful block letters, grocery items, and a small drawing of a Ferris wheel in the corner. The handwriting matched his school assignments. There was no question anymore that the riverbank had kept their secret since that night. Evidence technicians swept the scene. Until sunset, they found tire marks again, shallow but distinct, wide treads, worn on the outer edge. Same pattern as before. The plaster cast from June fit almost perfectly. The sheriff didn't want to admit what everyone was already thinking, that this was not an accident, not a runaway, not a story that would end quietly. When he called Rebecca that evening, he told her they were pursuing new leads. His voice cracked on the word new. The next day, Elliot Ward showed up at the command post, like he always did. Calm, helpful, eyes tired but steady. He offered to deliver supplies to the searchers near the viaduct. He said he knew the back roads better than anyone. One of the younger deputies noticed the dented fender on his truck looked freshly painted, the metal still dull from sanding. He mentioned it to the sheriff, who brushed it off. Coincidence, he said. The man works for the county. Trucks get banged up. He's been helping since day one. The deputy nodded but didn't forget. That night, a storm rolled in again, lightning cracking across the fields. Rebecca sat by the window, clutching the pink shoe in both hands. She didn't cry anymore. Her eyes were dry and glassy, the kind that had seen too much to produce tears. Outside, the rain drummed against the porch roof, washing mud off the steps, washing away footprints, washing everything clean except the ache inside her chest. 2 mornings later, a fisherman found something along the bend of the river, tangled in the reeds near the shallow bank. A piece of rope knotted twice at the end and frayed where it had been cut, lodged in the fibers were strands of fabric matching the red thread from Caleb's shirt. The water had preserved it just enough for forensics to confirm the pattern was county issue, the same nylon rope used by the maintenance department for hauling cables and tying down equipment, the same kind of rope Elliot Ward kept in the back of his truck. When investigators showed him the photo, he shrugged, said anyone could buy that rope at the hardware store, said he hadn't been near the viaduct since the first search, said his mother could vouch for him that night. The detectives nodded, thanked him for his time, but when they checked his phone records later that week, they found something small and impossible to ignore. A gap, an hour-long blackout from 9:30 to 10:30 the night the Dalton children vanished, the same window the cameras went dead, the same hour the town lost them. The sheriff called it an anomaly. The deputy called it proof. Rebecca called it a beginning. And somewhere deep inside Haven Ridge, something began to shift. People stopped waving at Elliot when he passed. The diner waitress stopped refilling his coffee. Children whispered. When they saw his truck parked by the church, the town that once trusted him now watched him in silence, and the man who had once led the search could feel the walls starting to close. The discovery by the river did more than reopen a case. It reopened a wound the town had tried to seal with prayer and patience. It whispered that the monster had never left. He had been standing among them, holding flashlights, drawing maps, shaking hands, and Nay had noticed. Not until the rain came and the earth decided it had kept its secret long enough. It was late September when the knock came, the kind that makes a whole street go silent. Morning light still low, fog sitting thick over the yards. The sheriff's cruisers rolled up Willow Creek Road one after another, their engines humming low, doors opening in unison. Neighbors stepped out in robes, clutching coffee mugs, trying to understand what kind of story was unfolding in front of their houses. Inside the small white bungalow at the end of the road, Elliot Ward was sitting at his kitchen table finishing the last sip of his coffee when he heard it. 3 steady knocks. Not hurried, not angry, just final. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't even ask what this was about. He opened the door, looked at the sheriff, looked past him to the line of uniforms behind the cruiser. His face was calm, like he had already been waiting for this moment. When the sheriff said his name and read the warrant, the words barely echoed. Arrest for the abduction and presumed murder of Caleb and Rosie Dalton. 5 years after the night they vanished. 5 years after he had led search lines through the same woods where he had hidden them. He nodded once, said he wanted to call his mother, then let them cuff his hands without a sound. The town that had called him a hero watched from behind curtains as he was walked to the car. One woman started crying. Another just whispered, "I knew it." The engines roared, gravel sprayed. The procession moved toward the courthouse like a funeral that had waited a decade to start. Rebecca heard it on the police scanner first. She drove straight there. No shoes, no coat, just her keys in one hand and the small pink shoe in the other. She reached the courthouse steps as they led him inside. Their eyes met for the first time since the fair. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked down, not in guilt, but in something closer to shame, like a man who finally saw the weight of what he had built. Inside the interview room, Elliot sat with his hands on the table. No lawyer yet, no coffee, just the hum of the fluorescent light above. The sheriff sat across from him, files stacked high. The photo of the bracelet, the rope, the tire cast, the call log with the missing hour. Elliot kept repeating that he was innocent, that this was a mistake, that he had been home fixing his mother's light, but the deputies had already checked. The light had never been broken. His mother was out of town that night visiting her sister in Macon. Her statement was short and flat. She said she hadn't seen her son since the morning of the 15th. She said he seemed tired, distracted. She said he told her he had work that evening but never said where. When they asked him about the rope, he said he used that kind for everything. When they asked about the dent on the truck, he said the paint was fresh because he liked things clean. When they asked about the blackout on his phone, he said it must have been the network. When they showed him the pink shoe, he froze. His fingers twitching once before, he forced his face back into stillness. The detective caught I.T., wrote it down, then slid across another photo, the bracelet found by the river, the one with Rosie's name. The clasp bent like it had been yanked. He stared at it too long, then looked away. His voice cracked on the next word. "I didn't hurt them," he said, quiet, almost convincing. Almost. Outside, Haven Ridge was already unraveling. The church bell rang at noon, but no one came to pray. The diner shut early, the school canceled classes. Kids whispered about ghosts by the river and a man in a white truck who used to wave at everyone. The reporters were back. Tripods planted in the mud, microphones shoved into faces that had no words left. One headline called it, "The Helper Who Hid the Truth." Another called it 5 years of lies. The sheriff called it closure, but Rebecca called it only the beginning. At the press conference that evening, he stood before the cameras, sweat shining on his forehead, and said the investigation had reached a turning point. He thanked the community for their patience and announced that forensic evidence tied Elliot Ward to the scene near the viaduct. Microscopic fibers matching the county maintenance rope were found on the fabric of Caleb's shirt, partial prints on the notebook page. Enough to move forward, enough to arrest. Not enough yet for conviction. But everyone knew, everyone could feel it, Haven Ridge had found its monster. That night, Rebecca sat on her porch again for the first time in months, the light still on, the air still heavy, the world still quiet. She thought about how many times Elliot had walked past her house carrying flyers. How many nights. He had stood only a few steps from the door, asking if she needed help, and she realized the thing no one wanted to say aloud, that sometimes evil does not hide. It integrates. It learns your routines, it becomes part of the prayer circle, the volunteer team, the town watch list. It learns your name, and you thank it for showing up. As the cruiser carrying Elliot Ward disappeared down the dark stretch of County Road, the porch light flickered once, then steadied again. The same light that had waited through 5 years of silence. The same light that would now burn, not in hope, but in remembrance, because Havenridge had finally seen the face of the man it trusted most, and the children whose names had haunted its nights were finally beginning to lead it toward truth. The first 48 hours after the arrest felt like time had no edges. Inside the Havenridge precinct, every light stayed on, coffee cups piled on desks, papers covered in fingerprints and sweat. Detectives pinned photos to the wall, the rope, the shoe, the bracelet, the tire tracks, the water-soaked notebook, and in the middle of it all, the face of Elliot Ward staring back from his license photo, calm, detached, like he was already studying the people who were studying him. The sheriff told reporters they were making progress, but inside the walls of that station, no one believed they were close to finished. The evidence spoke, but it whispered. By Thursday morning, the FBI arrived. They moved differently, fast, methodical, quiet. They dismantled Elliot's pickup inch by inch, screws falling to the concrete like rain. Under the rubber mat in the truck bed, they found fibers so fine they looked like dust. The lab later confirmed they matched the fabric of Rosie's pink dress. Under the passenger seat, wedged deep in the rail, they found a small wooden bead, round and painted faintly pink. The paint chipped at the edges. Rebecca saw it and stopped breathing. It was from the bracelet Rosie had made at the church craft table 2 days before the fair. In the toolbox, they found rope, the same kind as the sample recovered from the viaduct. Identical weave, identical fray, the same nylon line issued by the county maintenance department. They bagged it, labeled it, sealed it. The cameras outside caught the moment agents carried the box through the door. People stood on sidewalks in silence. Havenridge was watching its trust be loaded into evidence bags. That evening, a second team entered the county maintenance shed on the edge of town. The door creaked open. The smell of oil and rust hit first. Dust floated in the flashlight beams like ash. On a workbench lay 2 broken floodlights, a coil of extension cable, and a clipboard filled with service records. One line was handwritten in pencil. Maple Street Light Repair, June 15, 2019, completed. Beside it were the initials EW. It was the night of the fair. In a locker beneath the bench, they found an old metal lunchbox, dented and closed with a simple latch. Inside was a stack of photographs wrapped in a paper towel. Not of the children, but of the days after they vanished. Volunteers by the church, the Dalton house with candles on the porch, Rebecca sitting alone on the steps. Each photo had been taken from a distance, as if through a windshield. The last one stopped the room cold. It showed the fairground from across the river, the rides half dismantled under a gray sky. On the back, written in shaky ink, was a single word: done. When the photos reached the sheriff, he didn't speak for a long time. He just stared, then folded them back into the file. Outside, the town's news feeds filled with headlines about the discovery, calling it confirmation, calling it justice, calling it proof. But inside the Dalton house, Rebecca sat in silence, the pink bead in her hand, understanding something the others did not. Proof did not heal. It only confirmed the horror she had already lived through. The interview room smelled like metal and stale coffee. The walls were gray, the table scratched, the air too still to breathe. Elliot Ward sat with his wrists cuffed in front of him, staring at the clock that never seemed to move. He had been awake for 2 nights, his voice dry, his eyes glassy. The sheriff sat across from him, silent for once, letting the minutes stretch until silence became heavier than words. Then, the door opened and a woman walked in. Agent Ruiz from the FBI. Calm, sharp, deliberate. She placed a small recorder on the table, clicked it on, and said nothing. Elliot shifted. His fingers twitched once. He looked from Ruiz to the sheriff and back again. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady, without judgment. She told him they had the fibers from his truck, the rope from the shed, the photos from the lunchbox. She told him about the phone records, the blackout between 9:30 and 10:30 on the night of June 15th. He blinked slowly, like someone replaying old film in his head. Then she placed one more thing on the table, the pink wooden bead. For a moment, his jaw tightened. Then he looked away, his voice cracking when he finally spoke. He said he did not remember how it happened. He said he was only supposed to fix the light near the fairground. He said the kids startled him when they came out from behind the generator, laughing, playing, that he yelled, that Rosie screamed, that he just wanted them to stop. Ruiz let him talk. The sheriff wrote nothing, his pen frozen above the paper. Elliot said he put them in the truck because he panicked. He said he told himself he would take them home. He said Caleb was still breathing when they reached the viaduct. His words came faster, stumbling over themselves like stones rolling down a hill. He said the water was rising from the storm, that the mud gave way, that he tried to pull them out but could not. Then he went quiet again. The room filled with the hum of the ceiling fan. Agent Ruiz asked what he did next. He said he drove to the maintenance shed. He said he sat there for hours. He said the photos were not trophies. They were proof of guilt he could not erase. He said he watched the searches because he could not stop watching. His voice broke when he said Rosie's name. He said he heard her every time he closed his eyes. Then he whispered something almost too soft to catch. I thought if I helped find them, maybe God would forgive me. No one spoke for a long time after that. The sheriff stood, walked to the window, and stared at the parking lot where the rain had begun to fall. Agent Ruiz leaned forward, pressed stop on the recorder, and said the words that ended 5 years of silence. You just told the truth, Mr. Ward. When the news broke, Havenridge froze. The church bells rang once, not for service, but for memory. People left flowers at the Dalton house again, their colors running in the rain. Rebecca watched it all from the porch, the pink bead now sitting in a glass jar by the window. She did not cry. She only whispered 2 words to the wind, the same ones she had whispered every night for 5 years. I know. The trial began in early spring, 5 years and 9 months after the night Caleb and Rosie vanished. The courthouse in Havenridge was too small to hold the crowd that came. Reporters lined the steps. Families from neighboring towns carried candles and photographs, and television vans hummed in the square. Inside, the air felt like glass, about to break. The jury had been chosen in another county. 12 strangers brought in by bus, faces pale, eyes down. They knew they were about to walk through someone else's nightmare. Elliot Ward entered through a side door, wearing a plain gray suit. His hair was shorter, his face thinner, his hands trembling slightly as he Saturday. He never looked toward the gallery, never once looked at Rebecca Dalton. She sat in the front row, shoulders straight, her sister beside her. The pink bead hung on a thin chain around her neck. The prosecutor began without raising his voice. He spoke of trust, of a man who hid behind good deeds, of a town that let him close enough to everything sacred. He showed the photos from the lunchbox, the rope, the bracelet, the notebook page, each piece held up like an accusation carved in time. Then came the recording. Elliot's confession filled the courtroom, his voice echoing off the wood, steady at first, breaking halfway through when he said her name. No one moved. Even the judge sat frozen. The defense tried to argue accident. They said panic, shock, a mistake that spiraled into fear. They said he had been sleep-deprived, that he had been drinking that night, that he had meant no harm. But when the prosecutor replayed the last minute of the confession, the one where Elliot admitted he kept returning to the search sites, the silence in the room was absolute. On the 5th day, Agent Ruiz took the stand. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence, every timeline, every lie. Then she looked straight at Elliot and said he had not confessed because of pressure or confusion. He had confessed because he wanted someone to tell him the truth could still mean something. He looked down, his fingers shaking. When Rebecca was called, the room went still. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her voice soft but clear. She said she forgave him, but she would never understand him. She said he had not only taken her children, he had taken her belief that kindness was safe. The jury watched her the entire time, and none of them looked away. The verdict came after only 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice was quiet when he read it, but it struck through the room like thunder. Life imprisonment without parole. Elliot did not speak. did not cry, did not turn. Outside, the town finally exhaled. Reporters shouted questions that no one answered. The courthouse steps filled with people holding candles, their flames trembling in the wind. Rebecca stood among them, her face calm, her eyes red but dry. When asked how she felt, she said only, "Now they can rest." That night, Haven Ridge felt different. The porch lights that had burned for years were still on, but their glow no longer meant waiting. It meant memory. It meant the end of fear. It meant that two children, whose laughter had once echoed down Maple Street, had finally been brought home in truth, if not in body. In the weeks after the verdict, Haven Ridge felt like it was learning how to breathe again. The streets were quieter, the air softer, but the silence was not peace, it was exhaustion. The town had lived inside a storm for 5 years, and now that the noise was gone, no one quite knew what to do with the stillness. The church bells rang every evening at 6. Not for prayer, but for remembrance. People stopped by the Dalton house to leave flowers on the steps, sometimes toys, sometimes notes, small offerings for two children who had changed everything. Rebecca moved through the days like someone learning to walk again. Reporters stopped calling. The porch lights still burned, but for the first time, she no longer waited for footsteps on the path. She cleaned the house room by room, folded the clothes she could not throw away, and placed their photographs side by side on the mantel. Caleb in his red cap, Rosie with her toothy grin. The picture frames caught the morning light, and for a second it looked like they were glowing. The sheriff retired quietly that summer. No speech, no ceremony. Just a closed office door and a town that did not ask where he went. Agent Ruiz visited once more, to return the bracelet and the bead that had begun the unraveling of everything. Rebecca held them in her palm for a long time before placing them in a small glass box on the shelf. "They belong here," she said. Home. Across town, the old maintenance shed was demolished. The county called it a liability. Too much history, too much weight. They turned the land into a small memorial park. 2 oak trees planted side by side with a bench between them. The plaque read, "For Caleb and Rosie Dalton, whose light still guides us home." On the first day of summer, people came with candles. Children drew chalk butterflies on the pavement, and the air smelled like lilacs and rain. Rebecca began volunteering at the library, where her children used to spend afternoons. She helped other parents of missing children, taught them how to keep pushing, how to ask for help when the police stopped listening. She never talked about Elliot Ward again. The town did, of course, whispers in diners, quiet mentions at gas pumps, but his name carried no power anymore. He was a ghost in a gray cell miles away, and Haven Ridge had no more room for ghosts. As the 5th anniversary of the verdict approached, the town gathered again by the river. The water moved slow, silver in the late light. Rebecca stood with her sister on the bank, holding 2 white paper lanterns. She lit the first one for Caleb, the second for Rosie, and set them gently on the surface. They floated side by side, drifting toward the bend until they were just pinpoints of gold against the dusk. No one spoke. The only sound was the river, steady, endless, carrying the light forward. When she returned home that night, she sat on the porch and turned off the light for the first time in 5 years. The darkness was not frightening anymore. It felt like rest. Inside, the house was quiet, the air still, the framed photos waiting in their usual place. She touched the glass once, smiled softly, and whispered, "We're okay now." Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a sigh, and somewhere far off, the sound of laughter seemed to echo through the night, faint, but enough to let her know that peace had finally found Haven Ridge. Years passed, and Haven Ridge changed. The town that had once been a name whispered in tragedy became a name spoken with quiet pride. Schools taught the Dalton case as a lesson in resilience and truth. The old fairground where Caleb and Rosie were last seen was rebuilt into a community garden. Children ran where police once searched. Roses bloomed beside the cracked foundation of the Ferris wheel. Every spring, the first flowers were pink and red, planted by volunteers who said it felt right, like the siblings were still there, still watching. Rebecca Dalton never moved away. People offered, friends begged her to start fresh somewhere else, but she stayed. She said the house was not a tomb, it was a promise. She kept it clean, filled with light, the photographs still on the mantel, the bracelet still on the shelf. She spoke at small gatherings for missing children's families, her voice calm, her story stripped of anger. She told them that justice would never feel like victory, but it could still be peace. When reporters asked how she survived, she always said the same thing. You don't survive it, you just learn to carry it. The county renamed the program that investigated old disappearances. They called it the Dalton Initiative. It trained officers to never dismiss a missing child as a runaway, to never delay a search because of assumptions. Across Georgia, new cases reopened. Other mothers found their voices again. What began in a small town by a river had started a movement that reached far beyond it. Elliot Ward remained in the state penitentiary, serving life without parole. He rarely spoke. In his cell, he was known for fixing radios and helping other inmates write letters they could not find the words for. Once a year, he wrote a letter to Rebecca, but he never sent it. The guards found the stack after his death. 10 letters folded neatly, all ending the same way. I am sorry. I see them when I close my eyes. When he died, no one in Haven Ridge mentioned it. The paper ran 2 lines in the back pages. The town had already chosen what to remember. They remembered the children, the laughter, the porch light that never went out, the mother who refused to surrender. On the 10th anniversary of their disappearance, a new mural appeared on the wall by the viaduct. 2 children standing hand in hand, their faces turned toward a sunrise painted in gold. Underneath, in soft white letters, it read, "Light always returns." That night, the whole town gathered. Candles lined the bridge. Hundreds of tiny flames reflected in the river below. Rebecca stood in the front, her hair now streaked with gray, her eyes still bright. She spoke only once, her voice steady and sure. They taught us that love does not end where life does. It keeps walking, it keeps looking, it keeps the lights on. When the crowd fell silent, the wind lifted, carrying the candle flames in small trembling waves. The reflection of gold and white shimmered across the dark water, and for a moment, Haven Ridge seemed to glow from within. The tragedy that had once defined it had become something else entirely, a story not about loss, but about the power of those who refuse to let truth drown. Somewhere beyond the trees, the cicadas began their song again. Summer air, thick and alive. Life moving forward, quietly, endlessly. And as the final candle flickered out, Haven Ridge stood in the dark without fear, knowing the light would always find its way back. Years passed, and Haven Ridge changed. The town that had once been a name whispered in tragedy became a name spoken with quiet pride. Schools taught the Dalton case as a lesson in resilience and truth. The old fairground where Caleb and Rosie were last seen was rebuilt into a community garden. Children ran where police once searched. Roses bloomed beside the cracked foundation of the Ferris wheel. Every spring, the first flowers were pink and red, planted by volunteers who said it felt right, like the siblings were still there. Still watching. Rebecca Dalton never moved away. People offered, friends begged her to start fresh somewhere else, but she stayed. She said the house was not a tomb, it was a promise. She kept it clean, filled with light, the photographs still on the mantle, the bracelet still on the shelf. She spoke at small gatherings for missing children's families, her voice calm, her story stripped of anger. She told them that justice would never feel like victory, but it could still be peace. When reporters asked how she survived, she always said the same thing. You don't survive it, you just learn to carry it. The county renamed the program that investigated old disappearances. They called it the Dalton Initiative. It trained officers to never dismiss a missing child as a runaway, to never delay a search because of assumptions. Across Georgia, new cases reopened. Other mothers found their voices again. What began in a small town by a river had started a movement that reached far beyond it. Elliot Ward remained in the state penitentiary, serving life without parole. He rarely spoke. In his cell, he was known for fixing radios and helping other inmates write letters they could not find the words for. Once a year, he wrote a letter to Rebecca, but he never sent it. The guards found the stack after his death. 10 letters folded neatly, all ending the same way. I am sorry. I see them when I close my eyes. When he died, no one in Haven Ridge mentioned it. The paper ran 2 lines in the back pages. The town had already chosen what to remember. They remembered the children, the laughter, the porch light that never went out, the mother who refused to surrender. On the 10th anniversary of their disappearance, a new mural appeared on the wall by the viaduct. Two children, standing hand in hand, their faces turned toward a sunrise painted in gold. Underneath, in soft white letters, it read, "Light always returns." That night, the whole town gathered. Candles lined the bridge, hundreds of tiny flames reflected in the river below. Rebecca stood in the front, her hair now streaked with gray, her eyes still bright. She spoke only once, her voice steady and sure. "They taught us that love does not end where life does. It keeps walking. It keeps looking. It keeps the lights on." When the crowd fell silent, the wind lifted, carrying the candle flames in small trembling waves. The reflection of golden white shimmered across the dark water, and for a moment, Havenridge seemed to glow from within. The tragedy that had once defined it had become something else entirely, a story not about loss, but about the power of those who refuse to let truth drown. Somewhere beyond the trees, the cicadas began their song again. Summer air, thick and alive. Life moving forward, quietly, endlessly. And as the final candle flickered out, Havenridge stood in the dark without fear, knowing the light would always find its way back.